Private Adrian, you are a disgrace to this army. Colonel Mitchell shouted, his voice echoing across the training grounds at Fort Campbell. 3 weeks late in filing your maintenance report, and you have the nerve to show up here looking relaxed. I stood at attention in front of the entire company, 50 men in perfect formation watching my public humiliation. The Kentucky sun burned the back of my neck as Mitchell paced around me like a predator, enjoying every second of the spectacle. Maybe you'd rather go back home to mommy instead of really serving, he continued, eliciting muffled laughter from the soldiers. Because you clearly don't have what it takes to be here. I kept my eyes fixed ahead, my expression neutral, my shoulders straight. No muscle in my face twitched, no sign of anger or humiliation showed. That was exactly how I needed to look. My name is Adrian Foster, and at 32 years old, I've just been called a failure in front of 50 soldiers. What they don't know is that I've been here for 3 months on a mission so classified that not even Mitchell himself is authorized to know about it. But right now, for all intents and purposes, I'm just an incompetent private who can't deliver a report on time. Do you have anything to say in your defense, soldier? Mitchell stopped in front of me, his nose almost touching mine. His breath smelled of stale coffee and cheap cigarettes. No, sir, I replied in a firm but submissive voice. Of course you don't, he laughed, turning to face the formation. Men, you are looking at a perfect example of how not to be a soldier. This man has no discipline, no commitment, no honor. The words cut through the air like blades, each one calculated to destroy any shred of dignity I might have had left. Mitchell was enjoying every second, his face red with satisfaction as he built up his performance for the audience. Maybe a week cleaning toilets will teach you some responsibility, he declared, eliciting more laughter from the soldiers. And if that doesn't work, we can always review your status on this base. Sergeant Johnson, a 15-year veteran, looked at me with a mixture of pity and contempt. Private Martinez shook his head, clearly embarrassed on my behalf. To them, I was just another recruit who couldn't handle the pressure of the army. If only they knew. Private Adrian. Mitchell yelled. You'll spend the rest of the afternoon reorganizing the supply depot. Alone. And I want everything cataloged and reported by 6 p.m., or you'll spend the whole night in there. Yes, sir. I replied, keeping my tone respectful. As I walked toward the warehouse under the contemptuous glances of my colleagues, my military phone vibrated discreetly in my pocket. It was an encrypted message that only 3 people in the country were authorized to send. Operation Ghost. Activation in 2 hours. Extraction confirmed. I put my phone away without changing my expression. Mitchell continued yelling at another soldier, completely oblivious to the fact that he had just publicly humiliated someone who, in 2 hours, would be receiving direct orders from the Pentagon. 3 months pretending to be an incompetent soldier. 3 months enduring daily humiliation while gathering evidence of an arms smuggling ring that reached the highest echelons of the command. And Mitchell? Well, he had no idea he was the prime suspect in my investigation. If this story of military injustice caught your attention, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how this humiliation would turn into the most devastating fall Fort Campbell had ever seen. As I organized boxes in the dusty warehouse, pretending to be the incompetent soldier everyone believed me to be, the distant sound of helicopter rotors began to echo on the horizon. Mitchell didn't know it, but his days in command were numbered. The supply depot was a converted hangar that smelled of diesel fuel and rusted metal. Stacks of military boxes stretched to the ceiling, creating labyrinthine corridors between obsolete equipment and leftovers from past operations. It was the perfect place for someone to hide evidence. Or for someone like me to find it. Colonel Mitchell was 53 years old and had spent 30 years in the military. He started as a private in Iraq and rose through the ranks through a combination of genuine competence and dirty politics. The soldiers respected him because he knew the battlefield. His superiors promoted him because he knew how to get things done without asking inconvenient questions. But over the past 5 years, Mitchell had discovered that his position at Fort Campbell offered opportunities far more lucrative than any official promotion. Foster. His voice echoed through the warehouse 15 minutes later. Where the hell have you been? I emerged from behind a pile of ammunition boxes, a clipboard in my hand and a dedicated soldier's expression on my face. Cataloging expired medical supplies, sir. I found some discrepancies in the numbers. He narrowed his eyes. Mitchell had the kind of face that seemed sculpted for suspicion, Square jaw, heavy eyebrows, small, piercing eyes that always seemed to be searching for insubordination. Discrepancies, he repeated, snatching the clipboard from my hands. What kind of discrepancies? Some items listed as discarded are still here, sir. And some that should be here aren't. It was a calculated lie. I knew exactly where the missing items were, sold on the black market through a network Mitchell had built with the help of 3 corrupt non-commissioned officers and a civilian contractor who controlled transportation. But Mitchell didn't know I knew that. Are you questioning my management, soldier? His voice dropped to a dangerous tone. No, sir. Just reporting what I observed. For 3 months, I had watched Mitchell humiliate soldiers who got too close to the truth. Soldier Davis questioned why certain equipment shipments disappeared from the records. Mitchell transferred him to a base in Alaska. Sergeant Williams noticed discrepancies in inventory reports. Suddenly, she was under investigation for negligence in the performance of her duties. The pattern was clear. Mitchell used his authority to silence anyone who could expose his operation. You know what your problem is, Foster, he said, stepping closer, invading my personal space. You ask too many questions. Soldiers who ask too many questions tend to have very short careers. I understand, sir. I hope you do. He threw the clipboard on the floor, scattering the pages. Because I'm starting to think you might not be right for this command. The threat hung in the air like toxic smoke. Mitchell was testing my reaction, looking for any sign that I posed a real threat. A normal soldier would have gotten nervous, tried to explain himself, maybe even begged for a second chance. Instead, I slowly bent down to gather the scattered papers. I'm just trying to do my job the best I can, sir. Your job, he said, is to do exactly what I tell you when I tell you without question. Do you understand? Yes, sir. But as I reorganized the papers, my eyes caught something Mitchell didn't notice, a partially torn barcode label underneath one of the medical boxes. A code I had memorized 3 weeks ago when I tracked a shipment of morphine that had supposedly been destroyed by security procedures. The same morphine that showed up in a DEA seizure in Louisville 2 weeks later. And since you're so fond of asking questions, Mitchell continued, maybe you should ask yourself if you really want to keep wearing that uniform. I straightened up, meeting his gaze with the most neutral expression I could muster. I want to serve my country, sir. Then stop causing trouble. As he walked away, deliberately stepping on one of the papers I had organized, my phone vibrated again. Another encrypted message. Confirmation. Primary target identified. Awaiting green light for extraction. I quickly tucked my phone away, but not before noticing that Mitchell had stopped at the warehouse exit. He was looking back at me, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Suspicion? Curiosity? Or something more dangerous? Foster, he said slowly. Do you have family? The question caught me off guard. No, sir. Good. Soldiers without family are more flexible in their assignments. There was something about the way he said it that made my skin crawl. It wasn't just a casual observation, it was an assessment. As if he were calculating my value as a target or as a resource. Finish up here and report to my office at 7 p.m., he ordered. We need to discuss your future on this base. After he left, I waited 5 full minutes before moving. The silence of the warehouse was broken only by the distant hum of generators and the increasingly close sound of helicopter rotors. I walked over to the box with a torn label and, using a small flashlight, photographed the barcode with a special phone that looked identical to my standard military device. 3 months of humiliation. 3 months of being treated like the most incompetent soldier on the base. 3 months of watching Mitchell destroy careers and silence voices while building his parallel empire. But now, as the sound of the rotors grew louder and my encrypted phone displayed a new message, extraction confirmed in 10 minutes, I knew the charade was coming to an end. Mitchell thought he was dealing with a weak, questioning soldier. In 10 minutes, he would discover that he had spent 3 months humiliating a military intelligence officer with Level 8 clearance and direct access to the Joint Command. The helicopter was approaching, and with it, the moment when Colonel Mitchell would discover who he had really been trying to silence. At 7 p.m. sharp, I knocked on Mitchell's office door. The gold plaque gleamed under the fluorescent light. Colonel James Mitchell, Operations Commander. Behind that door, the man I had spent 3 months studying was about to show his true colors. Come in, his voice came through the solid wood. The office was a display of military ego, photographs with generals, framed diplomas, an American flag stretched behind a mahogany desk that looked like it cost more than a soldier's annual salary. Mitchell sat like a king on his throne, his fingers intertwined on an open folder. "Sit down, Foster." I obeyed, maintaining the rigid posture of a nervous soldier. The chair was deliberately low, forcing me to look up at him as he sized me up like a predator deciding where to take the first bite. "I've been reviewing your file," he began, leafing through papers with deliberately slow movements. 3 years of active service. No significant promotions. Multiple transfers. And now this situation with the reports. He closed the folder with a sharp snap that echoed through the office. "You know what I see when I look at you, Foster? I see a man who doesn't understand the importance of order, of hierarchy, of respect. Sir, I'm not finished," his voice exploded, making me recoil in my chair. "Do you want to know what your problem is? You ask too many questions. You question protocols. You act like you know more than your superiors." He stood up and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. Outside, soldiers continued their night exercises, oblivious to the conversation that would determine the course of the next few days. "In 3 decades of service," Mitchell continued without turning around, "I've learned that there are 2 types of soldiers. Those who follow orders without question and build solid careers. And those who ask a lot of questions and end up on remote bases in the middle of nowhere." The threat hung in the air like toxic smoke. "Which type do you want to be, Foster?" "The first, sir." "Good," he turned, a cold smile decorating his lips. "Because I just received authorization for a transfer. Air base in Montana. Weather monitoring. Very quiet, very isolated. Perfect for soldiers who need to recalibrate their perspectives. Montana. The most remote and forgotten base in the continental United States. For a real soldier, it would be the equivalent of professional exile. For my mission, it would be a disaster." "When would the transfer be, sir?" "Next week." He returned to the desk, pulled a gold pen from his pocket, and began filling out forms. "Unless." He stopped writing and looked me straight in the eye. "Unless you demonstrate that you've learned to value discretion." Discretion. The code word Mitchell used when he wanted someone to become an accomplice in his operations. I had seen this same pattern with Sergeant Williams before she was transferred. With Private Davis before he asked for a voluntary transfer. "What kind of discretion, sir?" "The kind that recognizes that certain irregularities in inventory are normal on bases of this size. The kind that understands that loyal soldiers don't ask questions about special shipments or unscheduled visitors." Unscheduled visitors. That was the first time he had mentioned that. For 3 months, I had cataloged the illegal shipments, the falsified records, the black market sales. But unscheduled visitors suggested something bigger. "I understand, sir." "I hope you do," he said, returning to his writing. "Because tomorrow at 0600 hours, you will have the opportunity to demonstrate that new attitude." My pulse quickened imperceptibly. "Sir." "A special shipment will arrive. Medical equipment for humanitarian redistribution. You will supervise the unloading and ensure that all documentation is accurate." Precise documentation. Another euphemism. He wanted me to falsify records. "And if I do that? If you do it properly, we may reconsider your transfer." He looked up from his papers. "But Foster, if there are any problems, any questions, any excessive curiosity, Montana will be just the beginning." As I walked back to the barracks, my mind processed every word of the conversation. Mitchell wasn't just testing my loyalty, he was actively recruiting me for his operation. Which meant my investigation had come dangerously close to the truth. In the barracks, I found Private Johnson sitting on my bed, clutching an official Army letter. "Foster," he said without looking up, "this came for you today. Official correspondence." I took the envelope, immediately recognizing the seal of the Army Criminal Investigation Division. It was my cover being maintained, but Johnson's presence alerted me. "Family problems?" he asked, with too much genuine interest. Johnson had never shown any personal interest in my life before. In fact, He had barely spoken to me since I arrived at the base. His presence here, asking questions about official correspondence, was no coincidence. "Nothing important," I replied, putting the letter away unopened. "You know, Foster," he said, finally looking at me, "some of us were talking about that situation with Colonel Mitchell today." "What situation?" "The humiliation in the yard. That wasn't cool, man. You didn't deserve that." It was an opening. Johnson was testing to see if I harbored any resentment toward Mitchell, if I could be turned into an ally, or if I posed a threat. "The colonel was right," I replied carefully. "I was behind on my reports." "Still," Johnson insisted, "he went too far. And it wasn't the first time. Remember what happened to Williams? To Davis?" He mentioned the 2 soldiers who had questioned irregularities and were then transferred. "This wasn't casual conversation, it was recruitment. They made mistakes," I said, maintaining my role as an obedient soldier. "Or they asked the wrong people the right questions." Johnson stood up and walked over to the window. "You know, Foster, some of us are noticing things. Patterns. Nighttime movements. Shipments that don't show up in the official records." My blood ran cold. If Johnson and other soldiers were investigating on their own, they could compromise 3 months of undercover work. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you do." He turned and faced me directly. "The question is, are you going to keep your mouth shut and accept a transfer to Montana, or are you going to help us find out what's really going on here?" It was the moment of decision I had feared. Reveal my true identity to protect innocent soldiers, or keep my cover and risk them getting hurt investigating on their own. "Johnson," I said slowly, "if you suspect something, you should report it through the proper channels." "The proper channels go through Mitchell," he replied. "And something tells me he wouldn't be too happy with our observations." Before I could respond, the sound of helicopter rotors echoed across the base. It wasn't unusual during the day, but at 10 at night? Johnson rushed to the window. "That's strange. There were no flights scheduled for tonight." I looked over his shoulder. A military helicopter was landing on the base's helipad, but it had no standard markings. It was completely black, with no visible identification. "Unscheduled visitors," I muttered, remembering Mitchell's words. "What?" "Nothing." But my mind was racing. If Mitchell had visitors arriving without an official schedule, it meant that the operation was bigger than I had calculated. And if Johnson and other soldiers were investigating independently, we were all in danger. The helicopter shut down its engines. 3 figures descended, all in dark civilian clothing. Even from a distance, I could see that they moved with the precision of military or intelligence professionals. "Foster," Johnson whispered, "I think we're about to find out exactly what Mitchell doesn't want us asking questions about." As we watched the visitors disappear into the administration building, my encrypted phone vibrated again. The message was brief but urgent. "Operation compromised. Action required in 72 hours. 72 hours. In 3 days, I would have to choose between maintaining my cover or protecting innocent soldiers who were dangerously close to a truth that could get them killed." The mysterious helicopter, the conversation with Johnson, Mitchell's threat of transfer, all the pieces were moving simultaneously toward an inevitable collision. While Johnson continued to watch out the window, I discreetly took out my military phone and sent a seemingly innocent message to my intelligence contact. "Medical equipment arriving tomorrow at 0600. Need more time for proper cataloging." The reply came back in seconds. "Time denied. Execute or abort." I looked over at Johnson, still at the window, unaware that he was about to become a centerpiece in the most dangerous operation Fort Campbell had seen in decades. In 72 hours, Colonel Mitchell would discover that the incompetent soldier he had publicly humiliated was, in fact, the architect of his downfall. But first, I had to make sure that soldiers like Johnson survived to see justice served. The sound of the rotors still echoed in my mind as the reality of the situation crystallized. My mission had evolved from investigation to rescue. 0530. The warehouse was plunged into darkness when I arrived, half an hour before Mitchell's appointed time. Not out of excessive zeal, but because I needed to prepare the ground for what was to come. During the night, I had finalized my plan. 3 months of undercover investigation were about to culminate in an operation that would expose not only Mitchell, but the entire smuggling network that extended to the highest echelons of the command. The sound of approaching engines broke the morning silence. Two standard military trucks entered through the side gate, followed by a black SUV, the same vehicle that had brought the mysterious visitors the night before. Mitchell appeared walking quickly, accompanied by Sergeant Wilson, a burly man who always looked at me with suspicion, and two civilians I didn't recognize. Men in dark suits, sunglasses even before sunrise, moving with the precision of those accustomed to operations that didn't appear in official reports. "Foster!" Mitchell shouted. "Here. Now." I approached, maintaining the posture of an obedient soldier, but my eyes catalogued every detail. The trucks had temporary license plates. The drivers wore military uniforms, but no unit identification. Most importantly, the boxes being unloaded did not have the standard seals for medical equipment. "You'll supervise the unloading," Mitchell said, handing me a clipboard with documents. "Each box must be catalogued exactly as it appears on this list. No questions, no curiosity, no deviation from protocol." I looked at the papers. According to the official documentation, they were medical supplies for international humanitarian redistribution. Morphine, antibiotics, surgical equipment. All perfectly legal and altruistic. But the boxes I had been watching being unloaded were too small for surgical equipment and too heavy for conventional medicines. "Yes, sir," I replied. One of the civilians approached Mitchell. "Colonel, we need to confirm the final destinations. The client in Caracas is getting impatient, and our partners in Lagos want assurances about the schedule." Caracas. Lagos. Two cities I knew to be distribution points for the international arms black market. The humanitarian redistribution was starting to make sense, in a completely different way than the official one. "Everything on schedule," Mitchell replied quietly. "Foster here will make sure the paperwork is perfect." The civilian sized me up with cold eyes. "Is he reliable?" "Completely broken," Mitchell smiled. 3 months of proper training. He's learned not to ask inconvenient questions." As they talked, I began cataloging the boxes. My fingers worked automatically with the clipboard, but my mind processed crucial information. Every code on the boxes, every name on the documents, every fragment of conversation between the civilians. "Box 15, I announced aloud, various medical supplies, estimated weight 40 pounds. 40 pounds of morphine would be enough to supply a hospital for months. But when I discreetly touched the box while checking the code, I felt the unmistakable shape of small, dense metal components. "Ammunition." "Foster," Wilson approached. "The colonel wants you to sign here confirming that everything is in accordance with the manifest." It was the moment of final decision. By signing those documents, I would officially become an accomplice to the operation. By refusing, I would reveal that I had discovered the truth and compromise 3 months of investigation. I signed with the slightly shaky handwriting of a nervous but obedient soldier. Mitchell watched my signature with satisfaction. "Very good, Foster. See? When a soldier learns to follow orders without question, everyone benefits." One of the civilians checked his watch. "Colonel, we need to wrap this up. Transportation to the port leaves in 2 hours." "Perfect." Mitchell turned to me. "Foster, you will accompany these boxes to the distribution warehouse at the port. Sergeant Wilson will go with you. Consider this a special mission." My blood ran cold. If I left the base now, I would lose the window of opportunity to implement my plan. Worse, I would become an active participant in the transport of illegal weapons overseas. "Sir," I said carefully, "I don't have clearance for off-base operations." "You do now," Mitchell replied dryly. "Direct orders. Unless you prefer to explain to our partners here why you're questioning authority." The two civilians watched me with renewed interest. One of them had his hand inside his coat, a subtle but unmistakable movement for someone with my training. If this story of infiltration and covert operations has you on the edge of your seat, subscribe to the channel because you haven't seen anything yet. "No problem, sir," I replied, ready for the mission. But as I helped load the last boxes into the truck, I discreetly activated the emergency protocol on my encrypted phone. A specific sequence of taps on the screen would send my exact location to the extraction team and start the final countdown to the operation. 60 minutes. In an hour, FBI and military intelligence helicopters would be circling Fort Campbell. The operation Mitchell had built over years would be dismantled in a matter of minutes. But first, I had to survive a trip to the port alongside Wilson and two professional assassins, who didn't yet know that the incompetent soldier sitting between them was actually an intelligence officer with the authority to take down entire commandos. As the truck pulled away from the base, Mitchell waved from his office window. He was smiling, convinced he had finally broken my resistance and turned me into another pawn in his corrupt operation. In less than an hour, that smile would turn to absolute terror when he discovered he had just sent incriminating evidence straight into a federal ambush I had orchestrated myself. The game had changed. Now it was just a matter of timing. The truck swayed around the curves of the rural road leading to the Louisville port. Sitting between Wilson and one of the civilians, I maintained the tense posture of a nervous soldier on his first special assignment. But beneath the facade, every fiber of my body was on high alert. 52 minutes to go. "Relax, Foster," Wilson said, noticing my apparent stiffness. "It's just a simple delivery. You do it right today, and the colonel will forget all about that report business." The civilian next to me, who had introduced himself only as Mr. Roberts, checked his watch for the third time in 10 minutes. "Are we on schedule?" 15 minutes, the driver replied. Roberts pulled out a satellite phone and dialed a number. "I confirm delivery on schedule. Yes, the soldier is with us. No problems so far." He hung up and studied me with cold eyes. "Foster, isn't it? How long have you known Colonel Mitchell?" 3 months, sir," I replied. "And in those 3 months, how many operations like this have you participated in?" It was a test question. If I said too many, I would seem too experienced for a soldier supposedly new to the network. If I said none, he would question why Mitchell had chosen me for this particular mission. "This is my first, sir." Roberts exchanged a glance with his partner in the front seat. "First special mission, and Mitchell picks you. Interesting." The second civilian turned from the front seat. "Foster, do you have a family? A girlfriend? Anyone who would miss you if you transferred to a distant base?" My blood ran cold. The question wasn't casual, it was a risk assessment. They were deciding whether I posed a threat that needed to be neutralized. "No, sir. Just the Army." "Perfect," Robert smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. Soldiers with no ties are the most valuable. They can go where the mission demands without leaving complications behind. 43 minutes. The port of Louisville appeared ahead, a maze of shipping containers and cranes stretching to the horizon. The driver turned into a side entrance, away from the main area of activity. We passed 2 checkpoints where uniformed guards waved us through without checking documents, clearly part of the operation. "Here," Roberts pointed to an isolated warehouse at the end of an empty pier. As we got out of the truck, I could see the magnitude of the operation. 3 containers were waiting to be loaded, 2 trucks had already been unloaded, and at least 6 armed men were strategically positioned. This wasn't just contraband, it was a full-scale military operation. "Foster," Wilson called to me, "you'll help with the final inventory. Roberts wants to confirm that everything is in order before shipment." I followed him into the warehouse. The space was larger than it appeared from the outside, filled with boxes arranged in precise rows. But something immediately caught my eye. Some of the boxes had markings in Arabic and Cyrillic. "Wilson," I asked cautiously, "those markings, where did these supplies come from?" "Don't ask questions, Foster. Just count and confirm." But I had seen enough. The markings corresponded to weapons that had disappeared from American bases in Afghanistan and Syria. Mitchell wasn't just selling supplies from the base, he was redistributing weapons from international operations through a global network. 37 minutes. Roberts approached with a clipboard. "Foster, I need you to sign here confirming the final count." I looked at the documents. They weren't standard inventory reports, but international shipping manifests. Destinations: Caracas, Lagos, and a port in Somalia that I knew was controlled by militias. "Sir," I said slowly, "these destinations. This doesn't look like humanitarian redistribution." The warehouse fell suddenly silent. Wilson stopped counting boxes. Roberts lowered the clipboard. The 2 guards nearby turned toward us. "Foster," Roberts said in a dangerously calm voice, "are you questioning the nature of the operation?" "No, sir. Just observing." "Observing too much." He signaled to Wilson. Perhaps our young soldier needs a more detailed discussion about discretion. Wilson approached, his hand resting casually on the gun at his waist. Foster, sometimes soldiers see things they don't understand. Things that become clearer after a proper discussion. It was time. They had decided I knew too much to simply sign and leave. In a few minutes, they would take me away for a talk from which I would not return. 29 minutes. I needed to buy time until extraction arrived, but I could no longer maintain the charade of an innocent soldier. It was time to change the game. Before that talk, I said, straightening my posture, there's something you need to know about me. Roberts narrowed his eyes. What would that be? My full name isn't just Adrian Foster. I took a special wallet from the inside pocket of my jacket, keeping my movements slow so as not to alarm the guards. It's Major Adrian Foster, Army Criminal Investigations. Security clearance level 8. The silence that followed was deafening. Wilson took a step back, his hand now openly on his gun. That's impossible. You're just an incompetent private. Incompetent. I smiled for the first time in 3 months. 3 months gathering evidence on an international smuggling ring. Documenting every transaction, photographing every code, recording every conversation. You think it was a coincidence that I was always there when the special shipments arrived? Roberts pulled a pistol. Lies. Mitchell checks all the soldiers. He would know. Mitchell checks files that military intelligence feeds with false information when necessary. For 3 months, he publicly humiliated a federal officer thinking he was breaking a troublesome soldier. The distant sound of rotors began to echo over the harbor. And now, I continued, checking my watch, you have approximately 25 minutes to decide whether you want to surrender peacefully or explain to the FBI why you were pointing guns at a federal officer. Roberts kept his pistol pointed, but his confidence was visibly shaken. You're bluffing. Am I? I pulled out my encrypted phone, showing the screen. Active tracking signal. My location has been monitored in real time by Joint Command since 0530 this morning. Wilson looked at Roberts, then at me, clearly trying to process the turn of events. If you're really a major, why didn't you arrest Mitchell before? Because Mitchell is just a small fish. I wanted the whole net. The suppliers, the buyers, the port facilitators, the international contacts. I gestured to the warehouse around us. And you just handed me everything on a silver platter. The sound of helicopters was getting closer. Roberts lowered his gun slightly. Even if that's true, you're alone here. There are 6 armed men. Accidents happen. You are 6 armed men, I agreed. I am a military intelligence officer with 3 assault squads flying our way, real-time satellite coverage, and enough evidence to convict an international arms trafficking ring. I tapped the screen of my phone. A metallic voice came out of the speaker. Command to Major Foster. Helicopters 2 minutes from the landing zone. Confirm status. This is Foster. 6 armed hostiles in the main warehouse. Physical evidence confirmed. Requesting support for multiple arrests. Roger that, Major. Hold your position. Roberts and Wilson exchanged desperate glances. The reality of the situation had finally sunk in. The incompetent soldier Mitchell had humiliated for 3 months was, in fact, the architect of a federal operation that was about to dismantle the entire criminal network. You have a choice, I said calmly, even with 6 guns pointed at me. You can try to get out of here shooting and explain to a military tribunal why you attacked a federal officer. Or you can put down your weapons and maybe get a plea bargain. The roar of the rotors now dominated the air above our heads. Roberts hesitated, the pistol shaking slightly in his hand. Mitchell, he said you were just a troubled soldier. Mitchell, I replied, doesn't have enough security clearance to know who I really am. For the past 3 months, while he thought he was breaking me with public humiliation, I was documenting every crime you've committed. The first helicopter landed outside, quickly followed by 2 others. Through the warehouse windows, I could see Special Forces soldiers taking up positions. It was then that Wilson finally lowered his gun. Sir, he said, looking directly at me, I'd like to negotiate. 48 hours later, I was standing in the same courtyard where Mitchell had publicly humiliated me 3 months earlier. This time, however, I was wearing the full uniform of an Army Criminal Investigations major, with all the insignia that revealed my true identity. Mitchell was handcuffed between two federal agents, his expression oscillating between disbelief and absolute horror. Wilson and the other members of the criminal network had already been prosecuted and convicted. Roberts himself was cooperating fully with the authorities, providing names and routes for the entire international operation. Major Foster, General Harrison addressed me as the entire base watched in formation. Please report the findings of Operation Black Mirror. I walked to the center of the courtyard, to the same spot where Mitchell had shouted that I was a disgrace to the Army. My voice echoed clearly and firmly over the absolute silence of the formation. During 93 days of infiltration, I documented an international smuggling ring that diverted more than 200,000 units of military weaponry to terrorist organizations and international cartels. The total value of the criminal operation exceeds $8 million. A murmur ran through the ranks of soldiers. Some looked at me with a mixture of admiration and shock, trying to reconcile the image of the incompetent soldier with the intelligence officer standing before them. The investigation revealed that Colonel Mitchell not only led this network, but had systematically eliminated any soldier who came close to the truth through forced transfers, demotions, and direct threats. Mitchell tried to speak, but one of the federal agents silenced him with a firm gesture. During these 3 months, I continued, I endured public humiliation, unfair punishment, and threats to my career. Every insult, every shout, every moment of disrespect was documented not only as evidence of abuse of authority, but as a demonstration of the character of a man who betrayed not only his country, but every soldier under his command. General Harrison stepped forward. Major Foster, your dedication to the mission under extremely challenging circumstances exemplifies the best of the American military tradition. Your ability to maintain cover even while being publicly disrespected demonstrates a strength of character rarely seen. I turned to Mitchell one last time. He looked like he had aged 10 years in 2 days. The arrogant man who had yelled at me was now hunched over, broken not only by the exposure of his crimes, but by the realization that he had spent months humiliating someone infinitely superior to him in rank, competence, and honor. Mitchell, I said calmly, you spent 3 months trying to break my morale, questioning my competence, suggesting that I didn't have what it takes to serve my country. He raised his eyes, meeting my gaze for the first time since his arrest. You were right about one thing, I continued. I didn't have what it takes to be a mediocre private. Because from day one, I was a major in disguise running the most important operation of my career. Private Johnson approached after the arrest ceremony, his expression still incredulous. Major. I mean, sir, all these months we've been talking, you knew everything. I knew Mitchell was involved in illegal activities, I replied. I didn't know the full extent until we gathered all the evidence. And when I asked you about the mysterious shipments, I was assessing whether you were part of the conspiracy or just an observant soldier. Your questions helped me confirm that you were honest and could be used as a witness when necessary. Johnson shook his head. 3 months of watching you get humiliated, and all this time you were in control of the situation. Control is a strong word, I smiled. Let's just say I knew how the story would end. 6 months later, I received an unexpected phone call. It was Wilson, calling from the federal prison where he was serving his sentence. Major Foster? This is Wilson. Former Sergeant Wilson. I remember you, Wilson. How can I help you? I wanted to apologize, sir. For all the times I laughed when Mitchell humiliated you. For all the times I thought you were just a weak soldier who couldn't handle the pressure. There was a long pause before he continued. You saved my life, you know that? If you hadn't convinced me to put down my gun in that warehouse, I'd be dead right now. And more importantly, you gave me a chance to cooperate, to do the right thing in the end. Wilson, I replied, we all deserve a second chance to choose the right side. How did you hold on, sir? 3 months of being treated like trash, knowing you could reveal your true identity at any moment. The question made me reflect on something I had learned during those difficult months. I learned that real strength doesn't come from shouting louder or humiliating others to feel superior. It comes from staying true to your principles even when no one is watching, even when it would be easier to give up. Today, I am an instructor at the Army Criminal Investigation Academy. I teach young officers about undercover operations, but more importantly, about integrity under pressure. On the wall of my office, I keep a photograph of the formation from the day Mitchell was arrested. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder that the real victory was not in his downfall, but in the preservation of the values he tried to corrupt. Mitchell is serving a 25-year sentence in federal prison. I hear he's spending his time studying law, trying to understand how a system he thought he controlled turned against him with such precision. The international smuggling network has been completely dismantled. Dozens of operatives have been arrested in 6 different countries. The weapons recovered will prevent countless tragedies that would have occurred if they had fallen into the hands of terrorists and cartels. But the moment that stood out most to me wasn't Mitchell's arrest or the public recognition. It was when Private Martinez, one of the soldiers who had laughed during my humiliation in the courtyard, came to see me weeks later. "Major," he said nervously, "I want to enlist in criminal investigations. I want to serve like you did." "Why?" I asked. "Because I learned that there are 2 ways to use power. One destroys people to make yourself feel strong. The other protects people even when it means sacrificing your own reputation." If this story of military justice and quiet sacrifice touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell. We have dozens of stories about people who turned humiliation into triumph, and you won't want to miss any of them. The last time I saw Mitchell, he was being escorted to prison transport. Our eyes met for a moment through the bulletproof glass. There was no anger in my gaze, no cruel satisfaction. Just the quiet understanding that justice, though it sometimes takes time, always finds its way. 3 months of humiliation turned into the most successful operation of my career. And Mitchell? Well, he finally learned the difference between having authority and deserving respect. Some leaders build empires through fear. True leaders build legacies through integrity. In the end, history always remembers which one you chose to be.